This is Family Twist, a podcast about astonishing adoption stories and finding family via DNA magic. I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey, and we've been inseparable partners in life since 03, 04, 05, also known as March 4th, 2005.
In January 2018, our found family journey took us 3,000 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area to New England, where we now live near my biological father, two half-siblings, and their families. We love being near them all, and the adventure continues. Welcome to Season 2 of the Family Twist podcast. I'm Kendall, and it was my adoption and found family story that led us to start this podcast. If you missed it, last season we introduced you to 3 of my 6 half-siblings, whom we discovered in 2017.
Yes, the first couple of episodes of the podcast really dug into Kendall's story, being adopted as an infant and what it was like growing up with his adoptive parents. And then we kind of teased, I think, at the end of the first episode, how we discovered your birth family.
Right. Which this is not a spoiler alert anymore, but we give a lot of credit to Ancestry.com because had it not been for that DNA match, I don't know that I ever would have found my biological family.
Right. And so when we decided to do this podcast, we thought, okay, well, let's tell Kendall's story and just have it be sort of like a historical significance, for us to kind of, have a record of this journey. But then we realized, well, there are some other people out there that have really interesting stories too. So we had some really remarkable guests in the first season.
In fact, we were just commenting to each other this morning that all of our guests have been so good that we would have any of them back. Not necessarily, doesn't have to be during this season, but just in general, we want to keep up with them. We want to hear more of their story as they unfold. I think most of you will agree that we've happened upon some really interesting stuff.
We decided to kick this season off with sort of a recap episode, just kind of going back to the very beginning of this first season and kind of taking you through each episode. But we've already recorded several episodes with some really, really interesting guests. I'm very excited for season 2.
Me too. It probably made a lot of sense that our second episode of season 1 focused on the very first conversation I ever had with any of my biological family, and that was with my brother, Chris. He's a great guy. We now live physically close to them, him and his wife and their kids. And it just made a lot of sense for us to start the story there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kendall and Chris really, they get a little bit emotional talking about that first encounter. And it is sort of surreal just thinking about it wasn't that long ago that you made that discovery and we first visited, and Chris and Karen's 3 kids were like kids when we first met at the airport. And now they're all in high school. I think they're all taller than us. Well, maybe not Mia.
Maybe not Mia, but odds are she'll get taller than I am, but maybe not.
Right. So it's just really cool that we've, been able to start this journey with a phone call. And then now we're able to, be there in person when the kids have their, football games and basketball games and softball and baseball games.
Yep.
It's exciting.
It is. It's something I never thought I'd have. But, I was so fortunate back in 2005 to become part of Corey's family, but then in 2008, we moved away from them. We moved to San Francisco from St. Louis, and I had some guilt associated with that. I was not only taking, Corey away from his family, but them away from him, so it's, but not that Corey's a good son and a good brother and a good uncle, and he goes back, as often as he can, and which I've wholeheartedly support because it seems like the least I can do for letting him, move across the country twice with me. But with that being said, back when we moved in 2008 to San Francisco was probably as difficult for me too, because I felt such a strong connection after through having 3.5 years with Corey's family. It felt weird to me to lose those people. I mean, the physical, proximity. So, I never imagined that I was going to find, nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters and parents. And, so it's been wonderful.
And really for me, as Kendall mentioned, I try to visit as much as possible, but it's about equal distance between San Francisco and St. Louis as it is New England and St. Louis. So
Right.
it's not like the flights have gotten longer.
Right. Good point. That's the nice thing about having St. Louis and our, first family be right in smack dab in the middle of the country.
Right. Yeah. Sort of the hub.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was actually Chris who helped Kendall discover the other side of his birth family, his mother's side. And we had on our third episode, the guest was Kendall's half sister, Stephanie, who these two have become just like peas in a pod over the last few years. It's been really wonderful to see that relationship blossom.
Right. And just to remind listeners, because I know my family dynamics are confusing, Chris, that we just talked about, is my father's son. And then Stephanie, is the sister that Corey just mentioned, is my mother's daughter. So while those two know each other now and enjoy each other, it's interesting because I flipped right there and started talking about, the second side of my biological family. But Corey is right. I feel really close to 4 of the 6 of them. And that's great. But physically, with proximity, I'm physically closest to my sister Monica and my brother Chris. And then the sister that Corey just mentioned, Stephanie, lives in Arkansas. So not around the corner, but she has been a trooper and has come to see us several times since we found each other in 2017.
So nature versus nurture has been a big theme of season 1, and I think will continue on into season 2. And so we really dug into that with a couple of episodes. One of them talking about Kendall's 3 mothers, his adoptive mother, his stepmother, and his birth mother, and just sort of not really comparing and contrasting, but just kind of talking about the whole concept of nature versus nurture and, you know, how that has played out in Kendall's life.
Yeah. And, still to this day, people people who knew my adoptive mother, Betty, people will tell me how much, I remind them of her. And then other people who know my stepmother, my adoptive father's second wife, Joyce, will often say that she and I seem so similar too. So there's your nurture side of the equation, the argument, to be made. Um, and then I think I look a little bit like my birth mother. And haven't gotten to know her, but I'm always curious to hear new stories about, her um, mannerisms, her, uh, speech pattern, all of those things are really fascinating to me to see how I might be similar to people in her family.
Right. And we also did an episode sort of talking about the nature versus nurture side of your 2 dads, your adoptive father, Rubel, and your birth father, Scott, who has guested on the podcast in a roundabout way.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for the listeners, both of my adoptive parents are deceased. So, of course, we won't get to, experience their voices except through me. And hopefully other guests who knew them will agree to be on, because I'd love to hear, other people's impressions of the 2 people that raised me and I feel made me the person that I am today. But 2 of the 3, I want to give due credit to my stepmother, Joyce, as well. She was, instrumental in my upbringing, not only when she married my dad, but also before that, because I've known her all of my life. And so, I called her Aunt Joyce before, she was my stepmother. So it's a crazy small town where I'm from, where those things can happen. But she was a mighty influence on me as well.
For sure. So I think a lot of podcasts probably tend to lean on people they know to maybe kick things off. And so we did invite a couple of people that we know to be guests and to share their stories. The first one was a woman who's like another mother to me. And she talked about what it was like to have children and then adopt a child while living overseas in Japan. And it's really fascinating, heartbreaking, definitely worth a listen. And yeah, I thank her for really sharing that story.
Mhm. In episode 6 of season 1, we met a woman named Sarah whose story is really interesting, and, different than mine in that I still believe about myself that as soon as I learned about my birth family, I needed to speak to these people. I needed to be known. I needed to get to know them. And she's somebody who purposefully, took a few years to make that, first connection. And I am always am always interested in that and how that happens in someone's mind. And her story was really interesting. I sort of understood her approach, and what she needed for herself to feel emotionally prepared for those meetings. So we really appreciate Sarah. We do want to revisit her story and see, what has happened, if anything, since we spoke to her last. So we're hoping to get her onto this season as well.
Right. She was really just sort of at the beginning of her journey of getting to know her birth family. So it would be, yeah, once she's had that opportunity to maybe have some in-person meetings, obviously the pandemic has slowed a lot of that for people getting together, in person across the country. But yeah, we'll definitely check in with Sarah and hopefully have her on this season.
Yep. Episode 7 of season 1 was the episode where we introduce you to my local sister, Monica. And you get to hear about her and Corey's love for Halloween. And Halloween's almost upon us again. And so, I love that she and I connect uh, on that level, and that Corey and she do as well. And, I just think, again, it was fantastic to have within those first 7 episodes, we had 3 of my siblings. It's just, it warms my heart still that they were all, you know, available and willing and interested and interesting, because they're all, great people and very charismatic. I do think on both sides of my family, we have that going on, for sure.
And if we could get the other three on in season two, we would happily do so. So we'll work on that.
Yeah.
So the next 2 episodes, it was a two-parter, so 8 and 9. I find to be really interesting because of the episodes were very polarizing. We had some feedback. People say, "Oh my gosh, Michelle's story was so raw, and she did such a wonderful job of telling it, and she really opened up some past family wounds." And I've heard a couple people say, "Ah, that's my least favorite episode." So there's got to be something really interesting in there for it to be people's favorite and for it to be others, let's say, not favorite.
Well, it could be triggering, right? I mean, um, and I think that's okay. I think that, she spoke her truth and did it eloquently. And I don't think she has any misgivings about it. We definitely don't. We would open the door for others who felt affected by that story in her family to tell their side of the story as well,
Right.
so we want this to be friendly, and helpful. So, but you, disclosure, I mean, Michelle is another one of the people that we previously knew before the podcast.
Yes. Michelle is one of our dearest, and she now lives in Europe, and we're planning to go and visit her next year. And who knows, maybe Kendall and I can visit a couple of spots that pop up in our ancestry and maybe visit, distant relatives. Who knows, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that could be an episode.
true, for sure.
Episode 10, a lot of fun because got to interview Nick, who is one of the genealogists from the PBS show Finding Your Roots. And he was just chock full of really interesting information about just how DNA works and what he does to help people find their roots, essentially. And so, he does it for the show, but he also does it for individuals just trying to find their family, trying to find some answers. So the next couple of episodes I already mentioned a little bit earlier, but that were really about, Kendall's two dads, and then also me kind of interviewing his dad Scott about, how Kendall was conceived. So yeah, that was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. And, for those of you who haven't heard those episodes, again, it sort of goes back to that nature versus nurture, um, discussion about how similar I am to my adoptive father. And then, the similarities that I found with me and my dad, Scott. He's very laid back. I wish I had a little bit more of him in me, as far as that's concerned. But just both men were just very nice guys. So, it's wonderful to, compare and contrast and find similarities too, about them.
So episode 13, I got the chance to talk to two sisters who were united after 48 years. Michelle and Trish were a hoot and a holler. Just after coming together and getting to know each other, they quickly discovered that they were both that love real estate, and they have become sisters selling Vegas in Las Vegas, and it's kind of become their hook. And yeah, it was a really fun episode. One of those where just like I got chills hearing their story. That happens time and again, though. It's even though I know a little bit about Kendall and I know a little bit about what we're going to be talking to our guests about. When you really hear the details, I mean, it hits home. And even if you're not experiencing, if you didn't have an adoption or found family in your past, I mean, it's just these stories are really touching.
Yeah, and I love things like that come to the surface, for instance, like with Michelle and Trish, that their children graduated from the same high school at the same time, years before they knew it, that the other existed. It's just fantastic and crazy, and I love those things. Episode 15 of season 1 focused on our guest Stormy, who was a really good storyteller as well as some of our other guests have been. And her story was tugged on your heartstrings, but not in a way in which she wasn't garnering pity for herself. She was very pragmatic about what she'd learned, from the things that she'd lived through. But she'd been in foster care and had been in 28 homes before she found a permanent one. And her story was just really interesting. And if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely check it out.
Her strength was really inspirational for sure. And I think Stormy, as we mentioned, we want to have, some folks back. I think Stormy is definitely one that will be, back either in season 2 or another season. It's hard to say like which episodes are really going to explode for people, but for whatever reason, and we haven't figured it out between me and Christina and Eileen, who are the guests. But this is by far our most downloaded episode, Finding Full Sisters After 50 Years. And again, this is another one where it's like, it's just a lot of wows throughout. I think you hear me say wow a lot just because I'm getting hit with these details of just like, I can't believe this happened. But again, two wonderful ladies, great to speak to. And, they're kind of at the beginning of their family adventure too after 50 years. So we will definitely check back in with them, not just because it's the most popular episode. So episode 18 was interesting because I really want to start getting into talking to folks who are these, they call them DNA angels, who are helping people find their families. And so Christine, has her own wild, family story, but she's now helping law enforcement get trained to solve cases with DNA, which I think is just really fascinating. She was wonderful to talk to. And then this one, I wasn't even sure if we'd be able to get this interview because this was the subject was, a best-selling book and a high profile docuseries. But we were able to talk to a man who um, searched for his birth father and realized that he may in fact be the Zodiac killer. Great, great, great guy to talk to.
Yes, we were very curious to see whether Gary, our guest, was going to be able to, talk about things that he talked about either in the book or on the docuseries, and he was. So, we appreciate his candor and his opening up to us, and really, really was a very kind and warm guest.
Absolutely. And I think what we've heard, and we're not doing this for the thanks or anything like that, but a lot of our guests have thanked us just for doing this podcast because it's an outlet for not only them to tell their stories, but hopefully to like help others down this path and maybe help others with healing. And so I think Gary had only done one other interview post the docuseries, and so very, very cool that he was willing to take a chance on us.
Absolutely. And two, he is another guest whose story isn't complete and, who we would like to reconnect with.
Absolutely. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I think we've already recorded with 5 guests for season 2 so far. We've got several more lined up, and we're also going to continue telling Kendall's story. We're really working on getting some of his family members who might have been a little reluctant to talk to us in the first season, just to let them know that, hey, this isn't we're not doing a gotcha type show. It's really just, trying to flesh out this story.
I think it'll be really interesting if we can get not only, another one of my siblings on, but also, cousins and my auntie and my uncle. And, I would love to have more people just so those of you who actually know me, might really get a kick out of hearing the voices, at least, if not seeing, video of people that are in my biological family. It still warms my heart, and I hope it speaks to a lot of you.
And we are still actively looking for guests, but if you know of somebody who has an interesting story, please share the podcast with them. Share our contact information. We'd love to hear from them. In fact, one of the folks or one of the sets of guests that we interviewed a couple of weeks ago just happened to find us while doing research on how to handle a found family situation and stumbled upon Family Twist. And it's a great story too. So just, I know that there are a lot of stories out there and we want to share as many of them as possible. So please reach out.
Thanks. And thank you for listening to us. You can probably tell by our starts and stops and pauses and ums and ahs that, this is not scripted. That's not our intention. Our intention is to really just reach out and have people reach out to us.
Absolutely. So again, thanks for listening, and let us know what you think as season 2 kicks off.
This is the Family Twist podcast hosted by Kendall and Corey Stulce, with original music by Cosmic Afterthoughts, and produced by Outpost Productions and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications. Have a story you want to share? Visit familytwistpodcast.com. All our social media links are there as well.